All right, let's begin. Today we're conducting a doctrinal analysis of the Battle of Guadalajara, a pivotal engagement fought in March of 1937 during the Spanish Civil War. Just so we're clear on the parameters, this entire analysis is based on the operational study by Spanish Army Colonel F.J. Victor Rodrigo. All the data, maps, and assessments you're about to see are drawn directly from his comprehensive work. Here's our briefing index. We'll start with the strategic situation, then move to a comparative force analysis. From there, we'll examine the operational plan, its execution, and eventual collapse, and we'll conclude with a final assessment. Okay, Section 1, the strategic situation. To really understand why Guadalajara happened, you have to understand the military reality immediately following the Battle of Jarama. So, by February of 37, the Nationalist push at Jarama has completely stalled. Now, Franco's high command had always wanted a two-pronged attack to cut Madrid off from the Levante, but they were hampered by a simple, critical problem: a lack of forces. The Jarama attack itself was launched with too few troops and zero reserves, so it bogged down fast. And this is where the new Italian expeditionary force becomes the game-changer. Mussolini is pushing hard for a rapid, modern offensive, a guerra veloce, something that could deliver a stunning victory and a triumphal entry into Madrid.
All right, let's move on to the second section. We'll conduct a comparative analysis of the opposing forces, looking at their composition, their strengths, and perhaps more importantly, their critical weaknesses.
The primary nationalist asset here was the Italian Corpo di Truppe Volontarie, or CTV, and on paper this was an absolute powerhouse. Commanded by General Mario Rata, it was a modern army corps with 4 divisions, specialized combat groups, and a massive artillery component. We're talking over 31,000 men, 40 battalions, and around 230 artillery pieces. Its level of mechanization and firepower was something that had just not been seen in this conflict yet. But, and this is a huge but, that strength on paper was masking some very severe doctrinal weaknesses. A huge portion of its troops were black shirt militia, not professional soldiers. For many, military training was minimal, if they had any at all. The force as a whole just lacked cohesion. Their only real combat experience had been in Abyssinia, and the recent almost uncontested capture of Malaga. And that easy victory bred a really dangerous overconfidence and a critical underestimation of the Republican opponent. Supporting the main Italian effort, you had the Spanish Nationalist Soria Division, specifically its 2nd Brigade under Colonel Marzo. Now, this was a pretty substantial force itself, about 13 battalions and 4 cavalry squadrons. Their primary mission was to advance and protect the CTV's right flank, though they were a largely infantry-based force. Now, on the other side of the line, you had the Republican 12th Division under Colonel Lacalle. They had the numbers, over 10,000 men, but the quality was minimal. You have to remember, the Guadalajara front was seen as a secondary, quiet sector. Because of that, defensive preparations were, and I'm quoting the source here, practically non-existent. The defenses were primitive. This division was simply not ready for a major attack.
But here is where it gets interesting: the Republican command structure. After his success defending Madrid and at Jarama, General Mija was put in command of the brand new Army of the Center, and his chief of staff was the very capable Lieutenant Colonel Vicente Rojo. On paper, this created a massive military apparatus of about 144,000 men. Now, a lot of that force was still getting organized, but it meant there was a formidable command entity in place that could actually react effectively to a major threat.
Okay, let's move on to the operational plan itself. We're going to dig into this concept of guerra veloce and expose the critical flaws that were baked into it from the start. So where did this idea come from? The initial concept originated with General Mola. With the Jarama front hopelessly stalled, he saw this powerful new Italian force as the perfect tool to punch a hole at Guadalajara. The idea was that this would force the Republicans to pull units away from Jarama, relieving the pressure on his exhausted troops. Franco gave this general concept the green light on February 23rd.
The final plan, cooked up by General Rata, called for a lightning-fast, decisive breakthrough right down the main Zaragoza-Madrid road. However, and this is absolutely critical, Franco's own headquarters issued 2 very explicit, very serious warnings. First, they warned that the Spanish brigade on the flank would not be able to keep up, which would leave the CTV's right flank dangerously exposed. Second, they pointed out that trying to link up with the exhausted nationalist troops at Jarama would be extremely difficult. These weren't minor concerns. They were fundamental risks identified at the highest level before a single shot was fired. And this really highlights all the other constraints that were just totally underestimated. Let's start with the terrain itself, a high plateau made of clay soil. With rain, it turns into an impassable quagmire.
Logistically, the plan was to funnel 4 motorized divisions down one single road. That's a recipe for a traffic jam of epic proportions. The weather forecast? Rain, snow, and fog, conditions that would completely neutralize air power and make artillery observation impossible. And finally, you had a command friction problem. Rada insisted on reporting directly to Franco, which basically created 2 uncoordinated battles instead of one unified operation under Mola.
Now we get to Section 4. We'll examine how the operation was actually executed and how all those flaws we just talked about led directly to its collapse.
On March 8th, the CTV launches its attack, and it gets an immediate breakthrough. They just punch right through the unprepared Republican 12th Division. But that success was incredibly short-lived. The bad weather that was predicted rolled in, turning the ground to mud. That single road became a massive bottleneck, and the whole mechanized advance just ground to a halt. The offensive fell way short of its first-day objectives, leaving units stalled, exposed, and jammed up.
The crucial moment, the absolute turning point of the battle, happened at the town of Brihuega. The stalled Italian columns were packed together, creating a perfect target. Republican aircraft, flying from nearby all-weather airfields, launched wave after wave of devastating bombing and strafing runs. At the same time, a small Republican infantry unit managed to infiltrate behind the Italian lines, while artillery from Cipriano Mera's division started pounding them. This created total chaos. The commander of the Italian 1st Division, suddenly taking machine gun fire from his rear, panicked. He incorrectly reported to headquarters that his entire unit was encircled, and based on that one, single, flawed report, the CTV command ordered a general withdrawal, which very quickly turned into a rout.
All right, Section 5. Let's conduct the final assessment and draw the key doctrinal lessons from this engagement.
When you lay it all out, the picture becomes very clear. The Nationalist failure stemmed from a combination of Italian overconfidence, a catastrophic underestimation of the weather and terrain, that critical command error at Brihuega, and poor coordination that left their flanks wide open. On the flip side, the Republican success was driven by the decisive use of concentrated air power, effective tactical command by leaders like Cipriano Mera, and a smart exploitation of the enemy's logistical collapse and vulnerabilities. And we really can't overstate the role of air power here. It was a decisive factor, as this slide illustrates. The Republicans had a massive strategic advantage. Their main airfields were close to the front, they were well-maintained, and they were at lower altitudes. The Nationalists, on the other hand, were stuck operating from distant, poor-quality airfields in Soria. That meant their planes had to fly over high mountain ranges, often covered in cloud and fog, just to get to the battle. This disparity was a critical, maybe the critical factor in the outcome.
The source provides a very clear and concise judgment on the battle's outcome. It states, "The victory in this battle is undoubtedly for the Republic, but more due to the very serious errors of the adversary than to its own merits." So, from a doctrinal perspective, the final conclusion is crucial. Guadalajara was not a catastrophic military defeat for the Nationalists. It was a maniobra fallida, a failed maneuver. Yes, it was a severe blow to Italian morale and prestige, but it didn't break the CTV as a fighting force. For the Republic, it was a huge political and propaganda victory. They stopped a very dangerous offensive against Madrid. But it's also important to note that their own counteroffensive, which followed the battle, also failed to achieve any kind of breakthrough. For anyone who wants a much more detailed, day-by-day analysis of this campaign or others from the war, the source material at batallasguerracivil.es is an absolutely outstanding resource. We'll conclude with a question for your consideration. How might a greater emphasis on joint operational planning between the Spanish and Italian commands, coupled with a more robust assessment of environmental intelligence, have altered the outcome of this pivotal battle?